it's confession time. Don't forget, if you miss a confession on any day, you can always go via the app and you can listen again. It's a kind of a little podcasty thing that we've done. You can only get it via the app. All the podcasts are there. Look for Simon Mayo's daily podcast. Is that right? I think
yes,
that's
it
right.
is.
There we go. Holly's in charge of that kind of thing. If it doesn't work,
it's all Holly, yeah.
Today's confession comes from James. We've heard from James before. You'll probably pick up on that as we wander through. Father Simon and the team, please forgive me one more time. I was always a pretty hopeless local radio reporter, says James. I just didn't understand local news. We all had the eyes on the big prize. Network news, hello. And looked with envy at the national correspondents in their shiny suits whenever they popped in to file a story. It was so much better than us lowly local journalists. So it comes as no surprise to hear my heart was not really in it. And much to my annoyance, my editor knew this. So to teach me a lesson, he'd always give me rubbish stories. The light stuff and the and finalies. And I hated it. This one summer, the radio station ran a Local Heroes campaign. Listeners had to nominate someone they felt did a great job in their local community. Litter pickers, sport team volunteers, charity runners, all-round good eggs. But frankly, Simon, I couldn't have cared less. Local fluff at its worst, in my opinion. And surprise, surprise, my editor gave it to me all to deal with. The radio station ran adverts around this local hero thing endlessly for weeks. And once the nominations had been processed, I had to do a piece on each of the runners-up to run on the breakfast show on the final week. And big finale was on Friday, when I would doorstep the winner live on air from the radio car on the breakfast show with a hamper full of champagne, wine, chocolates, and a good old radio station mug.
Mug.
Everybody wants. So the Friday morning came and it was chucking it down. But that was not the worst thing about the morning. I had to park the radio car around the corner to the winner's house so as not to get seen too early. I put up the 15-metre high telescopic aerial so the studio could hear me loud and clear, careful not to touch any overhead wires or face a massive electric shock, which frankly, Simon, that morning might have been light relief. I was on standby, and after way too much build-up, in my opinion, from the breakfast show presenters, they threw to me live in the rain. I was carrying the very heavy hamper and a very large microphone connected to a very heavy wire as I made my way to the house, chatting away live on air when things started to go very wrong. I got to the house, but the garden gate was closed. I had no hands free to open it. With rain dripping down my face, I shoved the gate hard, and in doing so, the hamper tipped over. The champagne bottle, the wine, the radio station mug all smashed onto the floor, along with chocolates, cards, and loads of other stuff. It was an absolute unsavable mess. I carried on talking as if it was going really well, but halfway up the garden path, the wire ran out. The cable was too short for me to reach the doorbell for the big reveal. Ant and Dec don't have this problem. I stretched my whole body as far as I could and just about managed to kick the door hard when suddenly a very confused and frankly scared old lady in a dressing gown and curlers opened the door. I tried to beckon her out onto the pathway in the middle of her front garden in the pouring rain to complete the live broadcast, and she blankly, flat refused, and understandably so. So eyes wild and through gritted teeth, I shouted loudly why I was there. We're live on the radio and it was a fantastic surprise. She looked utterly bemused. What a sight I must have been. Broken bottles, crockery everywhere, me soaking wet, frantically shouting my head off at her. And then she uttered those fatal words. Sorry, lover, you got the wrong house. Shut the door, went inside. This was the final blow, for indeed I had got completely the wrong person and the wrong house. And after the loud door slam, I was crestfallen, and in a sad and miserable voice, I uttered my final words ever on local radio. Well, that didn't go quite to plan. Now back to the studio. I left soon after this. It was mutually agreed. As you might be relieved to know, I never made it to national news. I think that's probably for the best. So, Simon, I wish to seek forgiveness for quite a number of things. I should have taken my job far more seriously and done my homework. I'm sorry for the woman I scared half to death that morning and the mess in her garden, to the actual local hero who missed out on her moment of fame, to the audience who must have thought, who is this absolute idiot on my radio? To them all, I wish to apologise and say that I would try and do better. But the thing is, I'm hoping that James might have another confession in there.
Yeah.
Because we got some fine tales out of him. Another tale from local radio. It's that short cable bit that I think I understood precisely what James is talking about. Sister Holly, stern words I'm imagining.
Oh, well, the thing is, and I should be harsh, really, but actually, I think I might forgive James today. He really tried his best. It was pouring with rain. He dropped the champagne on the floor. I've dropped champagne on the floor in the middle of the road in the rain before. It's very embarrassing.
What a lifestyle you have.
I know. We've all been there. And I just thought he really tried his best, and he got the wrong dot. I think it was a bad day at the office, really, for him, so I forgive.
It certainly was a very bad day at the office. Once he got back to the office, I imagine, brother from another guy.
I mean, it would be very easy, wouldn't it, to blame James on this, but I think there is another villain hidden within this story who's not reared his head, and that is the boss of said local radio station.
The news editor.
Yeah, because maybe they should have sprung for a producer, given he's having to carry the hamper and the microphone and open all of the gates and, work out whether he's at the right address. Should have sent a producer and maybe a longer cable as well. That would have helped, wouldn't it? So it's all down to the boss of the local radio station.
Are you talking about understaffing?
I am exactly what I'm talking about there. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
Okay, well, it's going quite well for James in our studio at the moment. Do you forgive him? That is the question. It's the people's verdict. We would love to hear from you. The text is 61054. First word is Simon. The people's verdict, please. 11 minutes after 6 o'clock. Just before the news, we had a confession from young James from his time in local radio. It was a big promo. Anyway, it involved a broken and spoilt hamper, a cable that was too short, a radio car parked in the wrong place, and then he got the wrong house after all of that. Anyway, the people's verdict is in. Here it comes.
And they're all forgiving tonight. I agree with Matt, says Josh in Hull. Really, the boss is at fault here. Why did James have to open the garden gate, hold the hamper, do the signal on the van, etc.? He just needed a helping hand. William in Bury St Edmunds says, please forgive James when most people have had a bad day at the office is not broadcast live to the entire county.
True.
And Michaela in Blackpool says, forgiven. So easy to get the wrong address and so easy to drop a hamper in the rain. I absolutely forgive.
Thing is, how many smart speakers does James want? Anyway, that's the issue here. Anyway, James gets the smart speaker, and if you fancy one, then all you have to do is to send us a rather fabulous confession. If we use it, we do a swap. That's the way it works. You send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. We're moving into confessional territory, and just a reminder that if you ever missed the confession, we're making it super easy for you to listen. You just do a catch-up. If you go via the app, I think it's called Simon Mayo's Confessional Daily. Or Daily Confessional.
Daily Confession podcast.
That's what it's called. There you go. It's easy to find. Just remember what it's called and remember what to look for.
Yeah.
And it's there. You can catch up on a daily basis. Another smart speaker handed out today's goes for Merrill. Merrill says, Simon, Matt, and the collective of fragrant forgivers, that'll be Holly. My tale takes us all the way back to London in the late 80s. I had graduated and was working my first ever grown-up job in the centre of town. It was a flaming hot summer's day. See, appropriately chosen. I had a doctor's appointment in Gypsy Hill, where I was then living with my boyfriend at the time. And so I left work early in the afternoon and made my way to Blackfriars Station to catch a train in order to make my appointment. I decided to take a Thameslink train to said Gypsy Hill. This is like the travel news.
Yeah.
I saw a train on the platform, which looked like it might be the right train, but in order to check, I wandered up to the driver's carriage and asked him if this was the right train. Now seems the right time to tell you that whilst I was talking to the driver, I was eating a big bag of grapes. What can I say? It was a hot day and I was hungry. This is a vital piece of information and will become pertinent shortly. Anyway, the driver explained to me that, unfortunately, this train would be going through Gypsy Hill, but would not be stopping there, as it was the fast train to East Croydon, and they don't come much faster than the fast train to East Croydon. I think that was an ELO song back in the day. Oh, well, I said, I'll get it anyway, and then just get on a train back. It'll be a bit late for I'll be a bit late for my appointment, but never mind. The driver approved my plan, and I boarded the train with my grapes. Some minutes later, I don't know why you didn't just wait for the right train, but anyway, this is the plan. Some minutes later, as I was cheerily staring out of the window, enjoying both the sunshine and my grapes, an announcement was made by the driver. I won't do that. Could the girl who asked me about whether this train is going to Gypsy Hill please make her way to the driver's carriage?
Wow.
Blimey, that's me, I thought.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm doing that. How embarrassing. So I decided to ignore his request. A few minutes later, another announcement. Could the girl who asked me about this train going to Gypsy Hill and who is eating a bag of grapes please make her way towards the driver's carriage? Well, the game's up, I thought. Grape half suspended in my mouth, everyone in my carriage beginning to stare accusingly at me because it's not the snack of choice.
No.
For many people. So I felt I had no other choice but to comply with the driver's request. After a somewhat embarrassing journey along the train where everyone stared at both me and my grapes, I gave a very tentative knock on the driver's door. It would be fair to say that what followed serves to demonstrate that the driver was a person known in common euphemistic parlance as a character.
Oh, no.
Exactly. Get in, he laughed manically, shutting the door behind me with a slam.
Oh.
I've got a crazy plan, he said. I'd be very worried. He then gave another louder self-congratulatory laugh. Okay, I replied without much faith in his plan and having more than a little trepidation. What we're going to do, he says, suddenly becoming London.
Yeah.
He hadn't been earlier, but then he had his tannoy voice on.
Yeah,
his tannoy voice
true.
was posh.
Yeah.
What we're going to do, love, is we're going to stop at your station, but because we're not supposed to, I'll just pull up to the very end of the platform and you can jump out. What do you think? I won't announce it as some of the other idiots, or do I try to jump off? I remember feeling at the time this seemed a rather harsh judgment on the other passengers, but maybe he was just having a bad day. I suppose so, I said. And so a few minutes later, the driver carried out his genius plan, and with what sounded like almost a battle cry shout of, "Now, now, now!" he wrestled me out of the train and onto, as promised, the very end of the platform at Gypsy Hill, which he wasn't supposed to stop at because it was the fast train to his Croydon.
Yeah.
I duly made my doctor's appointment on time, and all was well, thanks to the irregular actions of the driver. Say that again. Simon and the fragrant forgivers, I do not seek forgiveness from my fellow passengers that day, as I'm sure that the driver would have made up for any lost time in delivering me to my station. Also don't ask for forgiveness from any of the other passengers who, like me, may have wished to depart at a station which was also not scheduled. Just get the right train is my advice. Not something that you did, Meryl. However, I do seek forgiveness from the station guard at Gypsy Hill, who'd been taking 40 winks on a platform bench at the time of my rather undignified and hasty departure from the driver's carriage. He was so surprised he woke with a start and fell off the bench, falling backwards and landing with an oof sound like in the comics.
Okay.
The look of shock on his face told me that he guessed that he was still asleep and was actually dreaming.
Yeah.
Because Meryl was a vision.
Correct.
Naturally, I styled it out, gave him a warm smile and offered him a grape, acting as if such events were an everyday occurrence.
How many grapes you got?
I know.
These grapes are going on forever.
This has to be the biggest bag of grapes of all time. Maybe one of those supermarket sort of super deep
huge
pouches. Well, you have to say it's certainly an unusual confession, but it was the guy who probably looked like Bernard Cribbins at Gypsy Hill who fell off the bench, who had to pay the price for the recklessness of Meryl and the driver. Sister Holly looking puzzled.
I'm not sure how I feel about this one, to be honest.
Well, make your mind up time.
Well, I think personally, I think I'm going to forgive. Really, you know what? It was the driver that decided this bizarre plan.
Yes, he's a character.
She just went with it, really. She was just eating her grapes. She was happy to just go back on the train and find, which I wouldn't personally do, but it's what she wanted to do. So I think I forgive this one, to be honest, you know?
Okay, surprising. You could be becoming soft in your old age.
I am.
Brother from another another go.
And I mean, I'm obviously going to forgive as well because she didn't do anything wrong. In fact, she didn't do anything at all other than do exactly what the driver told her to do. A little bit odd that he would point her out as the girl who's been eating grapes. Why not just say, well, he did the bit about Gypsy Hill, the one that asked me about Gypsy Hill, but then why point out so everyone else can look at her and say, you're the one that's getting off a Gypsy Hill. Grapes are overrated as a fruit. I think we can all agree. When we decided to crush them with our feet and make wine, probably the best idea we've made since fire. So I am going to forgive.
For those reasons. People's verdict, please. Do you forgive Meryl, yes or no? On the text, please, 61054. First word is Simon. In just a moment, 7 minutes after 6. Earlier, we heard from Meryl, the girl with all the grapes, and how she got off a train at Gypsy Hill, even though it wasn't a scheduled stop, because of the character that was the train driver had a jolly wheeze, but the station guard fell off the bench. Anyway, it was all fun. I think it was all okay. Here's the people's verdict with Matt.
James in Hull says, totally agree with Holly and Matt on this one. She was happy to get the train to East Croydon and head back to Gypsy Hill. It was the driver that insisted on stopping at a station not on the list. Jeanette says, forgiven. My husband often used to jump off at Gypsy Hill back in the day. And Tracy says, definitely forgiven.
Hang on. So other people have done it?
Apparently, yes.
Wow.
Tracy says, definitely forgiven. As the daughter of a signalman, I was privileged to benefit from the odd unscheduled stop and even had the train held at the station for me if I was running late. Different times.
Wow.
Fantastic show to you and all the team.
Well, thank you very much. So I suspect there might be some other railway-based confessions.
I think we know there are now.
From sons and daughters of guards and signalmen and so on. Send yours, please, to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Matt's looking forward to his walk home very much.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's very good. And Holly's looking forward to us chauffeur-driven
Yes.
ladies to take her home. So it's confession time and another smart speaker to give away. This time it's to Giles.
Okay.
Just making that up as I go along. Giles says, Father Simon and the collect. By the way, there's a lot of manure involved in this.
Great
this tale.
news.
Right.
I'm seeking your forgiveness for an indiscretion from my past which has been troubling me for many years. I'd like to point out that I wish to remain anonymous, so I've changed the names of all those involved, including my own, which I've just changed again, so maybe it's ended up as the right name. The incident in question dates back to the autumn of 1989 when I'd just turned 19 and was living with my parents on the family farm. Like most other young people of a similar age from a farming background, I was an enthusiastic member of my local Young Farmers Club. During the late summer of that year, I had become very fond of a girl named Beth, who had recently joined the fold. She was a local farmer's daughter, and I was well and truly smitten by her. We'd been getting on quite well over the previous weeks, and sensing that she was a little interested in me, I decided that the time was right to ask her out. Now, I mentioned that most young folk of my age were Young Farmers Club members, but there were some exceptions. The son of one of our farming neighbours, Martin, was a quiet, shy lad of 20, who, to my knowledge, had never had much of a social life. So being the good-natured soul that I was, I offered to take him along to a club meeting, where he would make loads of new friends, and there'd be plenty of farmers' daughters looking for boyfriends. This is from the 1830s.
Yes, clearly.
So as promised, one night in October, I took him along. But by the end of the night, I wished I hadn't. For quiet, shy Martin had proved to be an instant smash with the girls. And with one girl in particular, by the name of Beth. To make matters worse, he liked her too. And this halted my plans to ask her out, as since his arrival, she never so much as looked in my direction again. Over the next few weeks, Martin became a regular at Young Farmers, quickly becoming an integral part of the scene. As he and Beth grew closer, rather than face rejection, I decided not to ask her out and instead turned my attention elsewhere, even though I was still keen on her. On the Thursday prior to bonfire night, so we're getting ahead of ourselves slightly, as Martin was driving us home after the weekly get-together, he told me he'd asked Beth out, and she had said yes. Upon hearing these words, my heart sank like a stone in a slurry pit, but through gritted teeth I pretended I was pleased for him. The next day, my cousin phoned and invited me to a bonfire party. It's quite a soap, this.
It is, isn't it?
My cousin phones and invites me to a bonfire party that she was having. I wasn't that bothered particularly, but wanting to forget about Martin and Beth, I decided to go along. And later that night, as I was driving to the party, a brilliant idea struck me as to how I could take revenge on Martin for muscling in on Beth, even though he'd done no such thing.
Yeah.
I stopped my car at the side of the lane and got out. The field next to where I was belonged to Martin's father and had recently been planted with wheat. Standing proudly in the middle of it and doing an excellent job of scaring the crows away was a very realistic-looking scarecrow called Horace, who'd been made by Martin's 17-year-old sister, Penny. I knew this was its name because the previous evening Martin had told me that he'd been up to the field that day to check on Horace and move him to a different spot in the field. I decided it'd be a good idea to steal Horace and take him strapped to the roof of my Datsun Cherry to the party where I could tell everyone I'd brought a guy to the bonfire so they could burn him. Without hesitation, I vaulted the dry stone wall and jogged over to where Horace stood. There was hardly any moon that night, but I could clearly see his sad, lonely face. As I looked into his eyes, which were, if I'm honest, a bit heavily overdone with mascara, I realised I just couldn't do it. Even though I wanted to lash out at Martin, I couldn't steal Horace away and condemn him to a fiery death. So reluctantly, I patted Horace on the shoulder and turned to leave. And then a thought. In a flash, I turned back to Horace and heaved him up from the ground, carried him aloft, made my way back to the road, where I dragged him over the wall. I crossed the lane and clambered over on another wall, the other side of which was a very long and very wet heap of chicken manure. Using all of my strength, I threw Horace high into the air, feet first, in the hope of him landing as far into the heap as possible, which it did. He described an arc, like a parabola, as it landed upright on his metal anchor pole, just listing slightly to one side as the wet manure settled around Horace.
Lovely.
Delighted with my work, I got back into my car and fled the scene. It was a good few days before Martin's father discovered that Horace had deserted his post and taken up residence on the other side of the road. Furious that the crows were now ravaging his wheat, this is a good harvest story, I think, he sent Martin to retrieve Horace from the muck heap. But Martin delegated the task to little sister Penny, who, when rescuing Horace, fell face first into what was the sloppiest part of the muck heap. As for Horace, I never saw him again, and at the time Martin was very tight-lipped as to his fate. We haven't had a scarecrow confession, I don't think, before. Father Simon asked for forgiveness not from Martin, who was eventually rejected by Beth. Ha-ha! Not from his nor from his father for the damage done to his crop by the crows, but from Penny, who fell into the muck, and also from her mother, who had to wash out her traumatized daughter's clothes. Well, it's a farmer's tale. Nice fade.
Nice fade.
Very good. A pot cut, I believe. Anyway, it's a farmer's tale. A scarecrow ended up in the slurry. What do you say, Sister Holly?
No, not impressed with this at all, Giles. There was nothing stopping you asking Beth out yourself. Why didn't you just do that? Nothing stopping you there. Martin didn't even know that you were into her, so really he had every right to ask her out. So honestly, the fact he was annoyed, just quietly annoyed, and really Martin didn't even know. And then Penny falls into the chicken manure. She was just a victim, just a real victim of all this, and didn't even do anything. So totally not forgiving at all here.
The heart is a complicated beast. Brother
So
from
true.
another gutter.
I'm going to forgive. I love this story because I had no idea where it was going. Normally with these stories, you've got an inkling of
It
where
was
it's going.
going into the chicken manure.
Chicken
Yes.
manure is where it was going. I love it. I mean, frankly, I didn't think there was any future in the relationship between Martin and Beth. I got off to a bad start, going behind Giles's back. I don't think that's on at all. And in the end, she wasn't interested, it turned out. So, the love's path took a different turn, as it were. And also, everyone learned a lesson, and Penny learned a lesson about how to get a scarecrow out of chicken manure, which is to absolutely make sure that you know where your footing is, because you might end up in the chicken manure. So for that, everyone wins. Everyone's forgiven. Well done.
Took quite a surreal turn there, I thought. Okay, that's the verdict in the studio. What is your verdict? Is Giles forgiven or not? The people's verdict, please, on 61054. First word is Simon. Thank you. Okay, so the farmer's confession today came from Giles, a story of the farmer's revenge. Throwing a scarecrow into a slurry heap belonging to his love rival's father. Oh, that taught you. Oh,
Yes.
I didn't really. Anyway, the people's verdict is in. Here it comes.
Mostly not forgiving tonight. Michelle in Liverpool says, I agree with Holly, not forgiven. Poor Penny was the innocent victim in all this, and she did absolutely nothing wrong. A victim of circumstance, indeed. George in Richmond, not forgiven. Martin didn't even do anything wrong. He didn't know Giles liked Beth, so of course he was going to ask her out. I'm convinced that if Martin had known Giles's feelings, he wouldn't have gone behind his back. But Joe on the Isle of Skye says, I forgive. I think the guilty one here is Martin's dad. His farm, his scarecrow. He should have got it back himself and not made poor Penny go and get it.
Your confession, please send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk.
Daily Confession Podcast.
Daily Confession Podcast.
So simple, really.
I know, and I forget every single day precisely what it's called. But you can find it. Go on the app in case you miss any of the confessions, because they're all there. So today's smart speaker, the last one of the week, goes to Jade. Jade, thank you very much. I'm going to give this a PG certificate.
Ooh.
I think that's right. For reasons that you'll see. Father Simon and the Moral Authority.
Yep.
Makes it sound like some kind of science fiction thing. I have a confession that I've been harbouring for 30 years. This is from Jade. Did I mention that? Anyway.
You did.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jade has sent in today's confession.
Is it Jade?
I have a confession that I've been harbouring for 30 years, says Jade, and I feel a need to repent. When I was a student living in a shared flat in the West End of Glasgow, I cohabited with 4 older male students, all doing PhDs. I was a first-year train wreck studying social sciences and spending too much time in the bars on Byres Road. However, my flatmates gave me a very important job every quarter with the itemised telephone bill. When it arrived, it was my job. Younger listeners might need to have this explained to them what an itemised... You know what an itemised phone bill is, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Phone bill where every call is listed
it is listed. Lovely. Yes, got it.
Okay. So I would take various coloured highlighters and work out who had called who, what the cost was, the share of the line rental, the handset and so on. It's relatively easy, as they all came from different parts of the country and would usually only call home. These were the days, of course, when a solitary phone call home once a week was quite enough to reassure anxious parents. Unlike today's texting, WhatsApping, threading, Facebooking generation who need constant updates about pretty much everything. Back off, parents, we don't need you. That was the whole point of going to university in the first place. Anyway, the phone bill allocation was my responsibility. This is Jade talking, because she sent this one in. One bill, however, stumped me. The caller detail on the itemised bill read Munchline.
What?
And I couldn't believe that someone in the flat was calling Munchlines. What was a Munchline anyway? It sounded sordid. Someone on the other end of the phone talking about Mars bars or slobbering over pizzas and
that'll be it.
kebabs.
Yeah.
What's all that about? My mind was working overtime. I was disgusted. I knew about adult chat lines, but kinky food lines? What?
No.
Really? Anyway, I knew immediately who it was. One of the boys was unhealthier than the others, and I thought, that's him. It's Flynn. We're calling him Flynn anyway.
Yeah.
He's been in his room fantasizing about Mars bars and fish and chips and chocolate puddings and others of the kitchen's greatest hits variety. Of course, I didn't say anything to my flatmates, but I did tell my friends. I said I couldn't believe Flynn in his room. Flatmates, though, I didn't say a thing. Didn't say anything to Flynn either. Just allocated the bill out, and they all paid, with Flynn, of course, paying for the Munchlines. Now, I've told this to so many people, still horrified that this was his fetish, but about 8 years ago, I was passing through Ayrshire, Father Simon, when I saw a sign for the ancient, but to me obscure town of Mochlin, 8 miles southeast of Kilmarnock, created by James IV in 1510, famed, I now understand, for its clockmaking, wood products, also the Robert Burns National Monument, but it's spelt Mauchline, which I, in my ignorance, had read as Munchline.
Yeah.
So Flynn was just calling his family in Mochlin, and I just hadn't worked that one out. Father Simon and the Moral Collective Authority, please find it in your hearts to forgive this drunken, illiterate social science student for shaming Flynn to anyone who would listen. I mean, I think a degree of sternness is going to be called for here. Jade is very hard on herself, but obviously Flynn came out of this rather badly. Sister Holly.
I don't understand why Jade didn't just ask the flatmates herself, the housemates herself, and just say, like, look, on the bill, something about Munchline. I'm a little bit confused about this. Maybe she just felt a little bit embarrassed, but she should have just gone out and said it,
Do you think?
really. I think she should have.
I think she was embarrassed.
She should have just said it. She should have just said it. And then it would have been cleared up and this never would have happened.
Right.
So I don't forgive.
No forgiveness. Okay. Brother from
Oh,
another.
I love that conversation. Have you been calling Munchline? No, I'm definitely going to forgive. I'm going to forgive just because Munchline is so good. It's the best. It's the best word we've come up this week. I love it. Very funny. Well done. Yes, nothing else to say. Munchline.
That's it.
Fabulous.
So if you're driving through, if you're 8 miles southeast of Kilmarnock right now, that'll be Mochlin. Everybody knows it's Mochlin, apart from Jade.
Munchline.
Munchline. So it's the people's verdict, please. Do you forgive Jade for this indiscretion? The people's verdict, please, on the text 61054. First word is Simon. Jade sent in today's confession about when she was a student 30 years ago in the West End of Glasgow and didn't know anything about Mochlin and thought it was Munchline. Anyway, it was all to do with an itemised phone bill, and the people's verdict is in.
So Chris Lee says, forgiven. We now have a new word, Munchline. Hilarious. Ali in Dundee says, being a Scot, as soon as I heard Munchlines, I knew what was coming.
Oh, really?
Not,
Okay, excellent.
not forgiven. Dave says, who hasn't had a Freudian slip whilst analysing their expenses? Forgiven. And finally, Alex in Cambridge says, I'm in two minds about forgiveness. On one hand, it was a hilarious misunderstanding. On the other, in her place, I'd have assumed that a Munchline was some kind of food ordering service. Why did Jade's mind instantly jump to something saucy?
30 years ago, maybe
not.
A whole lot worse then.
Yeah.
So we thank you very much indeed. Jade, thank you very much indeed for the confession. You get the smart speaker. And if you fancy one, send us in a confession. If we use it, the smart speaker will be yours. You send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. If you miss any of our daily confessions, you can go via the app and it's all there for you to enjoy.